والمقام. ميثاقها نهج الشريعة والعروبة والقيم، عاشت مملكة البحرين. بلد الكرام أهل السلام، دستورها عالي المكانة والمقام. ميثاقها نهج الشريعة والعروبة والقيم، عاشت مملكة البحرين.
Sheikh Mohammed, this is your third time, and we are grateful. And Your Excellency, Minister Mai, this is your second time, and we are equally grateful. Ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the third conference. And your presence here proves and confirms to us the importance of the subject of our conversation today. On behalf of Taqa'ud, I would like to express my gratitude to Sheikh Mohammed and to His Excellency Dr. Mait for again coming yet again and joining us today. Their presence again is a reflection of the importance of our conversation. Special thanks to the Central Bank of Bahrain, who for the third year in a row accepted to be a patron to this conference today. And excuse me, I will need to read. My memory is not what it used to be, but I need to thank a number of organizations who again have supported us in this endeavor this year and in prior years. So from Bahrain, the Social Insurance Organization, SIO, Usul, the Economic Development Board, EDB, Tamkeen, SAICO, and Al-Hikmah Society. From Egypt, the Ministry of Finance. From the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Public Pension Agency. From Oman, the Public Authority for Social Insurance. From Jordan, the Social Security Corporation. From the UAE, Abu Dhabi Global Market, ADGM, and the DIFC. From the UK, the Pension Administration Standards Association. And from Australia, the IFM investors. We are honored as well to have the support of the World Bank and the OECD today, represented here. This event is very critically supported by our sponsors, and they are Tamkeen, ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Markets, Aberdeen, Standard Investments, Allianz, Global Investors, Aon, Intertrust, Robeco, and the TMF Group. They have contributed generously to make this event as enjoyable as it will be. Their kiosks are outside, and hopefully you will have a chance to visit and take some of the material available for you. So, on behalf of Taqa'ud, let me say, the Taqa'ud journey started 7 years ago, and from the start, we at KIPCO, the parent company, we looked at this as not only as a business, but really offering something critical to our society, something that was not available, not being offered, and we felt that we could run a business, but also provide something critical to the development and advancement of society. The presence today on our third conference from people who span the globe, from Australia, the Gulf, the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, and the Americas, proves that it is a critical mission, and our time will be well spent today discussing the issues on the table. So, on behalf of Taqa'ud, thank you for being with us. I'm sure we will all learn a lot from the wisdom and experience of our speakers, so I look forward to listening to them. I do want to thank my Taqa'ud colleagues. My contribution is this. They have been working for months to put this together, and for that I am very grateful to them. So thank you very much, and I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our next speaker, the opener of this conference, Sheikh Hamad bin Abdullah Al Khalifa. Thank you very much.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Your Excellency Dr. Mohammed Maid, Minister of Finance of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Mr. Samir Khanashat, distinguished guests and delegates, good morning. On behalf of the government of Bahrain and the Bahraini people, I welcome you all to your country and to the third MENA Pension Conference. I would like to thank Taqaud to their invitation to me to speak at this important event. I would like to thank them for championing this initiative at a time of key socio-economic changes. It is my great pleasure to be here for the third time to inaugurate this important and growing conference in Bahrain and the region. Let me first extend a warm welcome to all the participants from abroad and from the Bahraini here and today. I hope our guests will make time to enjoy Bahrain's diverse culture and experience the many unique sites and activities. Yours is an industry that has special responsibility because people depend on you to help them have and plan for old age. And it is a responsibility that will only grow in the years ahead. People are living longer. They having fewer children. Life expectancy is expected to continue increasing. The ratio of retired people to workers is set to double in the next 3 decades. Public finance are going to remain under pressure. All of this has an implication for our economics. I think this large attendance today is testament to the importance of this subject and to the work you will be doing here. I am indeed very pleased to address this major gathering, which brings together both pension experts as well as human resource and finance executives, who all share a deep interest in developing a better and more sustainable pension solution for citizens and employees. The need to retire in comfort and security is universal. In this respect, the goal of the GCC and MENA region are the same as the goals in other countries. For this reason, we need to learn from the success and even the failures of others. In this region, we take pride in caring for the needs of our society. We strive to provide dignity and retirement for all our citizens. As Bahrain started seriously to address the issue of pension fund sustainability this year, His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa emphasized the need to attach absolute importance to the issue of pension through improving the situation of the funds and enhancing the services they deliver to retired and affiliates. In a manner that takes the public interest into consideration, ensures the sustainability of the pension and social insurance fund, and preserve the rights of the contributors and retirees. But we know that there are challenges that must be met. We need, as a society and as a region, to build awareness of the need of the retirement planning. I bid you, in your discussion and deliberation, as you consider actions and options to help all countries in this region move forward to improve pensions, enhance the sustainability and contribute to economic growth and security. May you enjoy your stay in our country, deliberate well, and share your knowledge and seek answers. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to welcome all of you at the third annual Middle East and North Africa Pension Conference 2018. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdullah Al Khalifa and all the leaders of this conference for inviting me for such an important event. Not only for me as Egypt Minister of Finance, but for the whole region as well. And I would like also to take this opportunity to thank the people, the government, and the King of Bahrain for the very warm and very high hospitality I have been enjoying since I arrived to Bahrain. I thank you very much for that. It is my honor and pleasure to be with you at this great event for the third year, respectively. I would like also to thank them for giving me the floor to give a keynote speech, and I will take this opportunity to highlight the Egyptian experience and trials for switching from DB, defined benefit system, to DC schemes in a general and more specifically applying the non-financial defined contribution scheme, NDC. We all believe that pension and social insurance programs are an integral part of any social protection system. Their dual objectives are to prevent a sharp decline in income and protect against poverty resulting from old age, disability, or death. The critical role of pension for protection, prevention, and promotion was reiterated and expanded in the Egyptian Social Protection Strategy for Reform, which takes the main important three key objectives for pension: coverage, adequacy, and sustainability, and asks how these objectives and the unavoidable difficult balance between them can be best achieved. However, it takes time to know the impact of reform, especially those of pioneer nature. Egypt operates one of the most expensive social insurance and pension systems in the Middle East and North Africa region, with more than 10 million people as pensioners and around 20 million people as insured. Contribution creates for old age, disability survivors, health, work injury, and unemployment insurance observe 41% of the payroll. However, we have a distinguished definition for what is called insured salary, which is relatively low compared to what we receive monthly. It's on average around 25% is the insured salary. Nevertheless, poor and often negative real returns on investment and inappropriate use of the available reserves have imposed on the country treasury a burden of ad hoc support to the system to finance deficit, annual pension increase, and special benefits. In addition, the weak link between contributions and benefits provide little incentives to pay into the system-defined benefit DB scheme, in which pensions are based only on final salary. As a result, the system is not financially sustainable, and financial projections indicate increasing deterioration in the medium to long term. The system has not only failed to provide an adequate living standard for pensioners and their survivors, but also has fallen short of many of its other objectives. The government recognizes the urgent need for a reform that can align the social insurance and pension system with current and future economic, demographic, and social realities, and so enable it to support future growth instead of becoming an unbearable burden on the Egyptian economy and the treasury. It was against the backdrop that Egypt was one of the countries who took the initiative and chosen to implement defined contribution schemes in general, and more specifically, the non-financial defined contribution, which we call it the notional defined contribution, or NDC, for its social insurance and pension system in the year 2010, following Sweden, who has chosen to implement the NDC for its public pension scheme in the year 1999, along with Italy, Latvia, and Poland, in which the Egyptian government has worked hard for more than 4 years on producing a new legislation to address all the inefficiencies in the current social insurance and pension system, a system that covers all the Egyptians with no discrimination, which is sustainable for future generations and that will apply the concept of solidarity and social justice. This new social insurance pension law was enacted by the Parliament of Egypt in June 2010, which is called Law 135 for the year 2010. It was planned to start implementing the new social insurance pension system from January 2012. However, due a lot of circumstances and the critical situation in Egypt that follows the 25th of January 2011 revolution, the implementation was postponed to July 2013. However, after the 30th of July revolution, this new social insurance pension law was totally cancelled due to some political interference. The cancelled pension system was combining a defined contribution, DC, component, and a redistributive non-contributory component. The transition was partial in the sense that it is only applicable to old age and the end of service indemnity benefit. Coverage for other risks for unemployment, work injuries, survivorship, and disability prior to reaching the retirement age was still based on defined benefit rules and includes minimum guarantee benefit determined by law. The pension model adopted was based on the principle that multi-pillar schemes serve multi-pillar objectives: sustainability, transparency, efficiency, and solidarity. To achieve these goals, it combines non-financial, which we call it notional, defined contribution or NDC component, and financial defined contribution FDC component schemes, the latter with central administration of funds, but with decentralized fund management. I would like to let you know that this innovative unfunded individual account schemes, NDC in general, provides a promising option at a time when the world seems locked into a stalemate between gradual reform of inefficient traditional defined benefit plans or their replacement with pre-funded financial account schemes. The past financial crisis, with its focus on sovereign debt, has enhanced the attraction of notional defined contribution as a pension scheme that aims for intra- and intergenerational fairness, offers a transparent framework to distribute economic and demographic risks, and, if well designed, promises long-term financial stability, supplemented with a basic minimum pension guarantee, explicit non-contributory rights, and a funded pillar. The NDC approach provides an efficient framework for addressing poverty and risk diversification concerns. However, based on our experience on trying to apply and build this DC system in Egypt, we found that although the critical adopted to define the parameters of the NDC component in Egypt was relatively consistent with the current international experience, a small number of cases and brief histories available had not provided conclusive evidence of best practice, and benchmarks are still only indicative. Implementation, regulations, and institutional capacity building in Egypt is demanding increasing effort in the near future to be able to think about a DC system again. On the other hand, and with regard to the financial defined contribution component, the main challenges were associated with a very limited experience with managing and investing the assets to fulfill the dual goal of maximizing return and minimizing risk. Let me say before I finish my speech that I remember one event which I would like to say it. I was working for a long time in UK. In 2007, I was working in Glasgow, And I was called by the Minister of Finance at this time. His name is Dr. Yusuf Boutros Ghali, and he called me to meet him and said, look, the Egyptian pension system is in deep crisis. We need to reform it. So I said, what is in your mind to reform? He said, look, I'm thinking about two elements. The first one is to move from defined benefit to defined contribution. I said, okay. What is the second? He said, I want to privatize some of the risks. So I said, okay, if this is the two goals, I'm not the right person to bring him to do this job. He said, what? I said, I don't believe in what you are telling me. I believe in something else. He said, what do you believe in? So I said, there is no one model. You can use it, which can bring it to a country and it will work perfect. You need to design a system which can address many, many factors. I'm a person who did his PhD in actuarial science, and in particularly with the DB pension system. So I said to him, look, Egypt is a country which has been implementing pension and social insurance for more than 120, 130 years. And it's impossible to switch immediately from defined benefit to defined contribution. This is number one. Number two, when we look at Chile, who started privatization of pension system, they had some weaknesses. So we have to think also about the legal umbrella when you switch. He said, what do you mean by legal umbrella? I told him, look at the Egyptian constitution. It states very clearly the risks which must be covered by the system. I give you one example, unemployment. I personally believe the government should not interfere with covering the unemployment risk. It should be given to the private sector. However, in order to do that, you have to go and to change the constitution. So you have to design within what is available. This is number one. Number two, a country which has a specific demographic structure and poverty level. So you have to think about what you're going to do with addressing all of that. Number three, privatization has no good reputation in Egypt. We did privatization of public sector in Egypt, which people, when they hear the word privatization, they get scared. So we will not be able to do it in this way. Okay, I know that our friend and the World Bank has provided you with a proposal to move from DB to DC and the privatization of most of the risks, including old age. But again, I'm not the one. So he said to me, what you can do for me? So I said, look, I can design a system which can combine both DC and DB. And I will address every risk with the design which will be gradually reform the whole system. He was thinking that I'm coming from 50 years behind. I'm a person with, as I was told later by some of our ministers at the Egyptian government in 2008, you are a communist mentality. So I said, no, I'm not a communist mentality. I'm a person who's thinking what is realistic to implement on the ground, and it can move gradually. Because with people, you have to think gradually, not shocks. Shocks create more problems than giving more solutions. So you have to move gradually, and you have to prepare the whole country. So he started to think. I remember he turned his chair and looked at the wall for a few seconds and came back and said, okay, I agree. You can go start. So I said, okay, I'm going to look at it. When I looked at it, I said, the proposal of our friend of the World Bank will not work in this way. He said, okay, talk to them. I talked to them, I met them, and I said, look, if this is imposed in Egypt, I can say to you from now, no. if this is what we can plan together, I will. They said, no, no, no. You design what you think is the best for your country. I said, this is good. Let us start. This was in 2007. We were in Cyprus. I worked with the World Bank for 3 years. I designed a mix of a system which addressed all the edge as a DC with both component NDC and FDC. And I addressed the other risks in a defined benefit manner with some of the funds created to support and ensure the sustainability of the system. Eventually, we got it in a law, and we were awarded for this design in many places with many international articles about the design and how it addressed all the concerns. Unfortunately, after the revolution, as what happened in Egypt, they said, oh, we are not going to go for DC. This is a saving account. We have to cancel it. Again, what I'm saying is this is the experience. But now, in 2018, we are thinking that we have to go back and design something which can mix between DB and DC. DB is creating now more and more problem. As His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed said, we are reaching aging population in Europe. We are reaching longevity risk in the whole of Middle East. So we have to address that, and we have to take into account that our pension system is putting more and more burden on our public finance and on our treasury. We may not be able to sustain it for long term. So we have to start fixing our problem now and put a solution to ensure that not only the pension fund sustainability will be ensured, but the public finance sustainability will be ensured. Thank you very much. I wish you a very successful.
Let me introduce myself. My name is Richard Banks, and I am going to be your moderator for this panel and for the panel that we'll run later on today on investment. So you have me twice. For those of you who are enamored with social media, if you want to tweet questions or comments about this panel, here he comes. We've set it up as hashtag MENA Pensions. So far, it's mainly me. But if any of you are active on Twitter, please do. Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, I think people might be able to tell the difference. You know, maybe. Good. Okay, we now have a full complement, so I'm going to sit down. We'll also have time for you to ask us questions, which you can do from the floor, but also, as I say, I'll be checking Twitter during the panel, and if you have questions you'd like to put through that, do that, hashtag MENA Pensions. Okay, so the title of this panel is a grand title, The World Pension Reform Journey. But really what our goal is, after the excellent speech of the Minister and the introductions from Mr. Samer and Sheikh Mohammed, what we want to try and do with the time we have here is to take a high-level view of the challenges and the opportunities that pension reform gives us as professionals in this market, not just in the GCC, not just in MENA, but all over the world, and to try as far as possible to show and discuss how there are commonalities between what's happening in pension systems all over the world and what's happening here in the GCC. and in the MENA and in the wider MENA region. So we're trying to go from global to local and pick up those themes, which will then go into more detail during the rest of the day. So what I'm going to do now is to ask my panelists briefly to introduce themselves before I start asking the questions. So, Leandros. Yeah, push. If you push, it should be switch on. Oh, right. Yeah.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. As you can see, probably on the screen, Leandros Kallisperas, Global Head of Pensions at Aberdeen Standard Investments. We're a global asset manager based in the United Kingdom. I guess my passion for pensions started in my previous role, where I was one of the Deputy Chief Investment Officers of USS, which is the largest pension plan in the United Kingdom, managing the pensions of over 400,000 people across 400 universities in the United Kingdom, with about $100 billion in assets. It was a privilege to manage money for a defined benefit pension scheme in the UK, one of the few that remains, as we've already started to touch upon this morning, but look forward to discussing the transitions towards DC as part of today's panel.
And your role at Aberdeen Standard, I mean, it's head of pensions. What does that actually involve? So what is your day-to-day job?
So solutions is a word that is commonly used in asset management and can mean different things to different institutions and people. But what it means for us and what it means for me day to day is that the governance challenges that pension funds face around the world have become so significant that there are times where partnering with an asset manager to help manage those day-to-day investment, operation, and governance challenges, becomes the thing to do. And therefore, whether you're talking about fiduciary management solutions, outsourced CIO solutions, or just simply broad troubleshooting for pension funds around the world, that's the day-to-day business.
Okay, so it's a wide-ranging brief that's as much about strategy and future as it is about specific asset management. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Handa, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, my name is Hamda Shamsi, and I come from Oman. I'm currently running the Public Authority for Social Insurance. We are taking care of the Omanis working in the private sector inside Oman and abroad. Besides my job with BASI, I'm also heading the Technical Commission for Old Age Disability and Survivors Insurance in the International Social Security Organization, the ISA.
Thank you. Marius, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning. My name is Marius Liske. I'm an economist and a social policy analyst at the OECD. We are based in Paris, and I'm part of the pensions and population aging team. So what we do is we ask countries, member countries of the OECD, to provide us with information about their pension systems. And then we publish reports in which we compare different aspects of these pension systems, of these public and also private pension systems.
And who reads your work? I mean, who is your... I know you don't really have clients as the OECD, but what audience is it directed at, and what are you trying to get them to do?
Well, first of all, I hope that a lot of people read our work. No, but
I've read all of it, every last piece.
So our audience there are different kinds. First of all, there are journalists that would like to compare different systems. Then, of course, academics that want to have comparable data and comparable assessments. Then policymakers who might be interested in the recommendations that we give, but also just interested people who want to understand how pension systems function.
Okay, thank you very much. Han, last but by no means least.
Great, thank you. My name is Han Yik. I'm head of institutional investors at the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum, I think most of you know from our Davos events. But Davos really represents our annual meeting where we showcase all the initiatives that we work on throughout the year with the goal of improving the state of the world as a nonprofit international organization. In my role as head of institutional investors, I work with the sovereign wealth funds and government pension funds of the world and in terms of engaging them in our initiatives. And one of the key initiatives that I head up is the one on global retirement investment systems reform, where we're trying to tackle some of the challenges that we're going to talk about here today. In terms of my own background, I've been with the forum only for a couple of years. My 20 years in the private sector. Prior to that, I was a portfolio strategist at Merrill Lynch, managing pension assets. And before that, I began my career as a pension actuary. So today's topic is very near and dear to my heart.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hamda, let's start with you as the not only the representative of the MENA region, but also of the pension funds themselves. What are the major challenges that PASI and the pension system in Oman face? What would you say, what keeps you awake at night, as it were, at the moment? And you can't say everything, you need to be specific.
Okay. I just actually, coincidentally, I just came from Malaysia. I was attending the Regional Social Security Forum for Asia and the Pacific. And my topic was about high public expectation in the Social Security schemes. And in this forum, actually, ESA released the 10 challenges facing Asia and the Pacific region. And prior to that, in 2016, the same document was released in Panama in the World Social Security Forum. That was the global challenges facing the social securities worldwide. And it seems the challenges are the same everywhere, whether it is in Europe, in Asia, in Australia. And it's maybe what changed between the global challenges and the challenges in the region is just the ranking. For me, when the ranking, the public expectation came, the 10th challenge in the document. But for me in Oman, it's one of the top challenges, actually, because I come from a country where the entire population actually are the Facebook generation. The entire population are below the age of 35. And you can just imagine living with this generation, I have one at home, and I couldn't keep up with her. I sent her away to study, by the way, and then she finished. She was very smart. She finished so fast. I offered to finance her master's degree, but she finished also so quick. And then I thought, you know what? Why don't you just stay there in Ireland and work there better? So now she's there. I got rid of my daughter, but I couldn't get rid of my pensioners. But this is in fact it's a main challenge in Oman, the high public expectation. In the GCC, we are one of the most generous funds in the world. The contribution is not balanced with the pensions. I'm just worried about this pyramid now, when we have the majority of the population are at young age. At this current period of Oman's, we have only 5% below above the age of 60. So imagine for 40 years from now, this entire nation is going to retire all at once. So this is a big challenge for us. The demographic challenges are also a big issue for us in Oman. The fertility rate is declining very rapidly, with women going to work. We started in the 1980s. The fertility rate in Oman was one of the highest in the world. It was 10.13. We reached to 4 in 2015, and it's still, I think it's 4. The expectancy, the life expectancy increased from 57 in the 1980s, early 80s, to 76.6 in 2017. So that's a big issue.
Okay, so there are some pretty crunchy problems there. Leandros, we'll unpack them all in a moment, but globally, is it true to say that the challenges that face the pensions in this part of the world are slightly different to those that they face globally? I mean, I know, in Germany and China, it's about aging, but here you still have a young population across the region, even in places like Egypt and others. But you do perhaps have more of a reliance or expectation, as Hamda put it. So are these problems you see elsewhere in the world? And is it just a case of different emphasis, or is there something fundamentally different about the MENA region?
Thank you, Richard, and it was very interesting to hear those thoughts, and particularly because a nuance of your question is, does the demographics trump everything when it comes to thinking about pensions? And of course it shouldn't. A young population in accumulation stage is an opportunity as well as a challenge. And it's an opportunity because it's about the asset side and it's about investment and returns, which obviously in other parts of the world has got drowned by how liabilities have run away. And I think the broader question of how assets and liabilities match or don't match is one that is probably true for this region as it is anywhere else. And that's quite simply due to the nature of accounting, methodology, government deficits around the world. I've spent all of my career in sort of capital structure kind of work, whether it's credit, fixed income, or structures that were prevalent as part of securitizations. And pensions is of a different order of magnitude in terms of the challenge in thinking about how you balance assets and liabilities. It's clearly a problem for governments. It's a problem for pension schemes as well. But I agree with you that the opportunity within this region, to the extent that the demographics are different, might actually allow for a slightly freer approach in terms of thinking about the opportunity, which I consider the accumulation phase, the next 40 years, as Hamda just mentioned. And then you get into something which I'm sure we will talk about, which is actually the funding arrangement, and whether that's a funded or unfunded arrangement, which is a different question to simply asking about the transition from DB to DC.
Thank you very much. Marius, again, the similar sort of question to you. When you look at your data, your research, is the Middle East an exception, or is it just at a different stage to, say, Western Europe or the US or Asia? I mean, can we learn from the fact that we might be at a different stage in the development here?
So first of all, unfortunately, we don't have countries here in the region that are part of the OECD, so we do not have a lot of data on this region. But I do think that countries here in the region are a little bit in a different situation already, like in the demographic structure. Today, a lot of countries here in the region are still very young, at least compared to OECD countries. But the aging prospects are extremely pronounced, which means that, from my point of view, it is a good time of thinking about pension reform to do it now. Because In other countries, in OECD countries, you have had examples of countries that took a bit too long and that maybe implemented reforms a bit too late, and that, of course, makes it harder then in the end to reach the goals of pension systems, because we shouldn't forget that the basic goals of pension systems are to provide pensions that are financially sustainable, but that are also high enough to guarantee people an adequate old age income, and in addition that the contributions that have to be paid to finance these pensions are not too high and are not a real too large burden for the labor market.
Okay, we'll come back again to those. And Han, again, for the opening question, do you agree with what our three panelists have said? And what's the perspective of of your organisation on this particular region and the challenges that it faces specifically?
Okay, sure. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to go to details, but you know the general makeup of what's here. How does that fit into the rest of the landscape globally that you see?
Sure, absolutely. And I just wanted to add that I am a reader of Marius's and the OECD's research, so we utilize that in terms of some of the work that we do as well. I definitely agree with a lot of what's been said. I think when we're looking at the challenges of pensions globally, I think Marius nailed it. The two main factors that are big challenges are adequacy and sustainability. You can have, if you can have a sustainable plan, but you're not paying adequate pensions, then that's a big challenge. We saw that in Chile recently. They faced a lot of public outcry over the fact that they feel, although they've passed a lot of great reforms and very innovative reforms, the population feels that their pensions are not adequate, and so they are now passing a new set of reforms just announced this week. I was in Santiago last week working with the Ministry of Finance in terms of some of the reforms that they're looking at, so hopefully this will be helpful in being able to address the adequacy aspect. But the other side of it is also sustainability. You can have very rich pension systems, but if it's not sustainable, then that will be a challenge as well.
When you say sustainable, just be a little specific on what that actually means in practice. I mean, it's a great word, sustainable. It's used across all sorts of different things. And there is a logic to it. But in the context of pensions, what does that sustainability actually mean?
Sure. So from the pension context, it's actually quite simple. It's really, can you continue to maintain that level of payouts?
You may need to speak a little closer to the,
sorry.
To the mic. Yep.
Yeah, hopefully this is a little better. Can you sustain that level of payout in the future? So one common, what we've seen globally, this shift from defined benefit to defined contribution, and that's because defined benefit pension plans provide an adequate pension, but it hasn't been sustainable when you look at the demographic challenges. In countries around the world where you have an aging population issue, a pay-as-you-go system is not sustainable when your worker base is shrinking. Now, you asked me about the region and one of the what challenges to expect. Given that in the region, it seems the demographic issues are younger overall, we have to look at, although that may not be an issue currently, we, in our paper, will live to 100, how can we afford it? We looked at where funding gap is right now in pension systems around the world, as well as where the pension gap will be in 2050. And those projections were done on an actuarial basis, and that's something that even in countries with a young population now, they will need to address when we look at the future.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your opening remarks. Let's run up and hug the elephant in the room here, which is expectations. And what we're seeing in the UK and in Europe is a gradual shift of the pensionable age. That's, of course, one component of it. Also, who qualifies for what type of pension. So, Hamda, just in Oman, how do you think it is possible to manage expectations that people will have to take pensions later or receive their retirement benefits in a different way? Is it purely educational, or does it have a social, even a political angle to it?
It's basically both political and social. What the issue we face in Oman is the fragmentation of the social protection. We have around 9 government pension funds. PASI is just one of these funds with different benefits. And people continuously comparing themselves with the other pension. This is that's something that that has been a very main challenge for us in PASI to do reform. PASI is, yes, one of the biggest, the healthiest, the strongest pension fund. But with this fragmentation, I find it very difficult to go about doing any kind of reform. The retirement age is crazy. I know in Oman we're talking about 45 years. In the government, if you work for 20 years, providing you are 45 and above, you're entitled for pension, and that pension could reach to 80% of the pensionable salary. In PASI, we've tried to introduce the reduction factor, but still it's just because as you can see, I think we in this region, we live one of the best era ever, with a very high life standard and excellent health services in the region. People are living longer. The life expectancy after 60 in Oman reached to 25 years. So that's definitely is a challenge.
Leandros, I don't know whether you have a lot of experience on this. I know USS has some issues and things like that. But again, going back to this, how do you manage the expectations? Because fundamental to what we're talking about is change, is reform. And that's going to mean that some people don't get what they think they were going to get. How do you manage that transition without causing, as Dr. Mohammed said, a revolution rather than an evolution?
Well, it's true in the case of USS that USS has had to change its benefit design structure several times in the last few years, from what was a gold-plated final salary defined benefit into a number of regime changes to where it is now, which is as a hybrid scheme at different salary thresholds and so on. It's fair to say that pensions is not the most exciting topic for individuals to think about. And that's
I think there might be some people in this room that disagree with you on that.
But when we're talking at the aggregate societal level, it is very difficult to have significant member engagement around pensions. There's a significant degree of inertia, and obviously in the UK that's been managed in part by forcing mandatory auto-enrolment, which has meant that you leverage the inertia to actually make sure that people save. But I do think at a slightly broader level, and perhaps one of the nuances of your question as well, is that whether it's DB or DC, the basic equation and formula of working for a certain number of years and retiring for a certain number of years doesn't change. And I think one of the dangers is that to get people excited in pensions, we tend to talk about the outliers and the extremes, whether it's early retirement ages that are unsustainable and so on. I take a slightly different view, which is that, there is nothing implicitly wrong with the formula. In defined benefit, the formula is explicit. In defined contribution, it's implicit. But I actually think that on an education basis, as you've described, being honest with the people about that, but also actually explaining that actually the formula, if it's appropriately set, works, is a starting point.
How important do you think is this concept I mean, pensions as a concept are no more than 100 years old, really, just over 100 years old in the UK. The idea that you work to a certain age, you retire, you get a pension, and that sees you through until you die. The pension ages were set in a very different time. The societal structure was very different. You were a miner. You worked hard. 65, you were basically finished. You had a few years and then you died. Now, you retire even at 65, you can expect to live, especially if you're a lady, into your 90s. That's a 30-year period where people now increasingly say, well, I'm fine. I'm physically healthy and I can continue to work. So how is important this is? It's not just people retiring at 65 or 67, but they want to do different things with their lives. They want to continue working. Is that psychological change a part of a key to managing expectations? So rather than this work, stop, retire, it's a transition from employment gradually to less activity as you get physically incapable of doing so. Is there an angle there that can be played about changing the way people think about retirement?
I'm not a sort of behavioural sort of economist or scientist in that sense, but I'll answer the question.
Have a go.
I'll answer the question as in the same way that I've tried to answer a couple of the others, which is that the focus on the liability is one that has become extremely prevalent in society as a whole on many different topics, which is everyone is focused on the outcome. And the outcome is frightening, and the liabilities simply loom larger and get bigger. And it's become a problem at individual level, it's become a problem at societal level. Pensions, in my sort of preferred definition of it, is a lifetime, and therefore it's a journey as much as an outcome. And therefore, the sooner we can actually, focus on the journey part of it as well, which is about savings at individual level, but also savings and investment for society. I mean, we seem to be quite far away from the idea of individuals saving and doing good for their country and their nation at the same time. So I think that sort of the way I would look at it is, if you're 22 years old, the question of whether you're going to have to retire at 65 or 70, I don't think is the real question in town. The question in town is actually what's the appropriate level of saving that you might need to do, what benefit might that have for you and society at large, and focusing on, dare I say it, an element of the communistic and the collective, which is that whether it's defined benefit or defined contribution, we are all in this together. It would be nice to actually incorporate that within the overall psychology of the problem that pensions exhibit.
Okay, thank you very much. Han, do you want to comment on that, or you comment, and then Marius?
Sure. Yeah, I was itching to jump in on that question.
Yeah, well, I could see you sort of shifting in your seat.
Yeah, no, this whole idea of the future of retirement and rethinking what pensions means, I think, is something that's extremely interesting. When we were looking at this issue initially, and being a former actuary, this whole idea of age 65 retirement, which is so prevalent around the world, really was designed to provide a few years of income beyond that. But now we are living much longer. That's why our paper was provocatively titled "We'll Live to 100," but that's based on projections for people who were born today. That's actually not too far off. What does that mean going forward? So I think that we look at the way work itself is changing right now because of the fourth industrial revolution, because of technology. The idea that we work at one company for a lifetime, the company provides benefits, that itself is changing. We have the informal economy, the gig economy, we have platform solutions. So work itself is changing in terms of young people today. I think the other big consideration then, when you don't have one company which you're staying at, which in the past is how pensions were provided, you also then have to look at what it means when you're in retirement. Back in the day, whether you had an adequate pension, it was assumed to be a replacement ratio of your current income, and we were assumed to need a lesser amount than what we need today. As we continue to live longer, though, that question no longer becomes the same, because it's inextricably tied to healthcare and our health needs as we get older. Because I think that it is true, after 65, there's a period where you will need less income, but what is the quality of life as we continue to live longer? And will those medical needs increase the cost that we need for pensions? So that's something that also needs to be looked into. I think in terms of the reforms that people have been looking at, one of the key areas that people always talk about is raising retirement age. That in itself also has unintended consequences. The Japanese had looked into that, and they already have a problem with an aging population. And if people of the older generation stay on longer in their roles, it does prevent opportunities for their younger people to move into those roles. So, I'm citing Chile again because they had just passed reforms recently, but instead of raising the retirement age, what they've looked at is incentivizing people to work longer. And therefore, instead of, there's political difficulties in raising retirement age as well, but by incentivizing people to work longer, that also can help address the problem. So, a few things.
I mean, there are so many issues here. It's absolutely amazing. Sorry, Marius.
Can I just add something quickly on the question of raising retirement ages? So in the OECD, we see that on average, the retirement age is, of course, increasing because people live longer. However, there's one consideration, because when we look at data of life expectancy between different people, between people of different socioeconomic groups, we can see huge differences. So highly educated people do indeed have a very high life expectancy, but people with low educational backgrounds, they really have a lower life expectancy. Now, if you have like a sweeping retirement age increase, this means that you punish most, actually, those people who have a low educational attainment. And of course, I don't have a miracle solution here, but this is something that should be taken into account, and that you should think about it when you raise retirement.
It's a very good point that it's not as easy. I mean, there is more complexity in that than there might seem from a 30,000 feet view of it, which is very interesting. Han, you want
Yeah, you said I could interrupt, so I was going to agree with that point and just say, from an actuarial perspective, in the United States at least, they do have separate actuarial tables for blue collar versus white collar workers, and so you can definitely see the differences in terms of life expectancy and gains in that, and in terms of where work is headed for that. That is something that needs to be taken into account as well.
I mean, all of what you've said, all four of you have said, is pushing us towards this concept of the pension matching the individual, rather than there being just a standard approach to this. And part of that is coming into this whole business of owning your own pension through things like DC. So, Leandros, how in not just in terms of actuarial, in terms of funding and performance, what are the benefits that DC has over DB, and why would, from a pensioner's point of view, not from a pension provider's point of view, but if I'm one of Hamda's pensioners, I would have already retired 10 years ago by now, but anyway, why would I accept moving to DC? I know why we would want as professionals, but why would I as a person want to go that direction?
Well, there are a few things. One is that you might actually just feel comfortable that actually the state has been honest with you as to how pension provision works, and you may actually sort of give credit to your governments for actually sort of moving to that arrangement. In terms of the savings and investment side, clearly in a defined benefit arrangement, you tend to be pooled into default products where you are effectively investing alongside others in a very collective arrangement. But we know, as Hamda says, the Facebook generation has a very different view on how it thinks society should be, takes a more assertive view on the sorts of investments and things that should be spent on. And clearly there is more transparency about the sorts of things that asset managers invest in generally. So one of the things that DC certainly allows for, there's a question mark over how much that's actually being used, but from a philosophical perspective, is that you can actually make the sorts of investments you want, which makes you feel good about where your savings are going. May also increase your engagement with it because you actually know what it is that you're investing in. Clearly that requires some level of engagement, but actually if you can get to a place where actually you know what you're investing in, that it in itself may have a positive effect on the overall regime.
Okay, so Hamda, from your perspective as a government, as a state pension provider, what attractions does DC have to you? I know we spoke about this offline, but you've got a DB system. Why might you, as a state entity, begin to look at aspects of DC? What's it going to give to you? What's going to enable you to do that you can't do at the moment?
To be honest with you, I don't understand DC, and I'm not really comfortable with it, especially being now I'm heading the Technical Commission of Old Age and Disability Survivors Insurance, as I mentioned. And I don't feel, I just feel that it shifts the risk from the government and employer to the employee. And I don't feel that it provides protection for the individual, and we've seen it during the financial crisis in 2002. Several, I know that in the U.S., for example, several states went to DB, and then during the crisis they had to go DC then had to go back to the DB. I might think of it, and actually we are thinking of it, and this is why we are here. My colleague here, Shamsa, she is heading a project, a DC project, but as a second layer to the DB, but not replace the DB. I would not think.
But as a complementary.
As a complementary, because we have a cap on the pensionable pension in Oman, and there are sectors who have very high salaries would want to have an additional benefit. So for those, we are working now on a DC plan for them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Marius, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, so I think that one advantage that I see is for DC plans, that today labor mobility is increasing, and it's easier when you have a DC plan to move from one employer to another. Yes, this is one. But I agree that it's essentially it's a matter of who bears the risk, who takes the risk, and also who takes the responsibility. And this brings me to one point that I consider as important. If you say in a DC plan that individuals are the ones who bear most of the risk, then it's important that they really understand what's going on, that they understand the products, and that they understand the system. So we at the OECD, we gather data on financial literacy. And there you can see that in some places you do have a good understanding of financial literacy, but that you have a high degree of financial literacy, but in others there's a huge lack. And how it's really important to address this, because you want people to understand these systems, because if they don't understand them, they cannot trust them, and if they don't trust them, they will be reluctant to make savings.
Han, do you want to say anything?
Sure. Yeah. I think, who are the major stakeholders? We have individuals who receive the pensions, we have governments, and we have employers, the private sector. And if you look at the shift from defined benefit to defined contribution, a lot of the, as Marius mentioned, you see these risks shift from the government and the employer bearing a lot of the investment risk and the funding risk onto the individual themselves. So individuals under a DC system have to be their own financial planner, their own actuary. They have to think about how to invest their assets, all of that, when they need to start withdrawing. I don't think we need to be trapped into a binary choice between DB and DC. I really liked what the minister mentioned about trying to find that the benefits of both and that hybrid in between. I talked to Deputy Prime Minister Tharman in Singapore about this issue, and he's a strong believer that we have to have a happy medium where it's not the individual who bears all the risks themselves, and not the government and the employers. So really, the key is to be able to find that medium where the risks can be shared more between the three major stakeholders, and I think that's got to be the goal for real pension reform.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got just under 20 minutes left, and I'm going to start opening this up for questions. And I wanted to thank Kim and Phil and Still Hopeful, who've all sent me questions on Twitter. But before I go to those questions, does anyone have a question in the audience? Do we have a spare microphone? Brilliant. Dr. Mohammed. Your Excellency, sorry, I should step there.
Let me say something. The session is World Pension Reform. I have to take this title and say that we have to be very careful about pension reform. From which side we are talking about the reform? If you talk about, as a Minister of Finance, reform means keep this system away from the state budget. I don't want it to see every year a burden on the state budget for supporting and subsidizing the pension reform. Try to keep it away from me, okay? And ensure that it will be sustainable apart from the state budget. However, if you look at the system itself, reform means ensure sustainability, ensure that the system will be able to match people's expectation. However, I have to say that moving from defined benefit to defined contribution in itself is not an objective. Mm-hmm. The objective is to ensure sustainability of any system. So, what I'm trying to say that we see that moving from defined benefit to defined contribution, as you said, is sharing the risks. So instead of the system will take all the risks, investment risk, in the Middle East, North Africa, we say that we have the longevity risk rather than an aging population. We have a high fertility rates. This is number two. Number three, that the whole system with time is building huge actuarial deficit as a result of defined benefit nature of that. So the system might say, oh, the solution is to move from defined benefit to defined contribution. However, let me say that we have to prepare our people to such a culture of, let me say that, sharing the risk between people and the system. When you make the reform, whether the reform will be parametric or systematic, increasing the aging or the normal retirement risk is one of the options. Increasing the contributory period is one of the options. Reducing the accrual rate is one of the options. Or switch the whole system and the structure of the whole system from defined benefit to defined contribution, or mix between them. Let me say, as a politician, I will be very careful when I redesign the system or go for privatization of some of the risks. Let us say we look for work injuries. Why the public system should take such a risk and manage it? It has to give it to the private sector. Unemployment risk. Why the state pension takes this risk and manage it? Give it to private sector. And even you can share, as you mentioned, additional part of the system, defined benefit, additional part defined contribution. And you can partner with the private sector in this part or in managing something like the investment fund. Again, this is what might be a reform from the system point of view to ensure sustainability. look at the people. People reform means more generous system. Give me more. Ensure that this system will ensure my living standard. This system will ensure that it will address the inflation time by time. Ensure that when I die or I become ill or something, the system will be generous with my survivors or myself. So in order to mix all these reform, you will have to address a lot of concern. The last thing is what we mean by reform from the pension industry. Pension industry wants a reform which will ensure that it will be partner in managing pension system and social insurance. So I'm trying to say that we have a lot of discussion, we have a lot of conferences, we have a lot of talk about reform. However, let me say, my point of view is that how you address all the stakeholders concerned and design a system which will ensure, by the end, financial sustainability, by the end, people's expectation, by the end, government expectation of a pension system, and the industry expectation, which, from my point of view, is not an easy job. You need to have somebody to. So again, I'm just telling or addressing this point to the panelists. How can we reach a reform which can address all these elements? Because my point of view, again, if you want to change, it is important to change now, particularly that most of the pension system in the Arab region will have a very heavy weight on public finance and will contribute heavily to the deficit and to additional borrowing, which will make life difficult, as we face in Egypt. Currently, public finance is putting more and more burden on the state budget, and we have to borrow for that, and we have to pay interest for that, and we have to pay back. So again, it's a time to look at how can you reform and how can you address all these elements. This is what I thought about world pension reform with this. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking this time.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much. Not an easy question to answer in 5 minutes. We'll come to you next, but Hamda, please.
I wanted to comment on the reforms. See, I'll give an example. I'll talk about Oman because the way I see it, in Oman, we have the leisure of time. As I said, we are a very, very young scheme. We are 25 years old. We have huge amount of cash inflow, very minimum outflow. And as I said, the population is young. And at this age, its change resistance is not as big as in the older generation. So I personally feel, and that's what I'm pushing now, is it is the right time for reforms in the region, and especially in Oman, because you have the benefit of time, you have the benefit of the population, the young population, you have the leisure of the technology, and it's just I think time. And the other thing is about shifting the risk to the private sector. That's when you talk about a developed country with a good or established private sector. And countries like my country, where the 80% of the income comes from oil, and your private sector is not matured enough, and it's really very. Even the private sector depends solely on the public sector. I don't see it. I don't know. But I don't see even introducing defined contribution at this stage would work in my country. You need a high level of financial literacy, and you need a good economy to support that shift.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's take another question. There's a lady here, and I will come to you next, sir. Please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am Faiza Abdullah Al-Mas'ari from Riyadh. متقاعدة من from قوات البرية وزارة الدفاع. خدمة في الإدارة 30 سنة. في ذكرت الأخت أو الأخوات تكلموا عن النظام الDC. نظام الDC هذا أنا أول مرة أسمعه، ويمكن غيري كمان من الدول العربية نفس الشيء أول مرة يسمعونه. يا ليت بس نبذة بسيطة عن النظام هذا. هل هو نظام عالمي ممكن نستفيد منه في الدول العربية أو نظام خاص؟ يا ليت شرح بسيط عن النظام هذا. شكرا ومقدرا لك.
I think Hamda, because Hamda can understand.
Arabic or English? Okay. Okay. بالعربي بجاوب بالعربي. انزين. اوكي. الفرق بين الديفايند benefit والديفايند contribution is with the defined benefit لما هو طبعا هو contract بين السوشيال سيكيورتي organization وبينك انت كindividual. When you enter this contract, you know ahead of time what benefits you are going to get 50 years from now, 30 years from now, what entitlements your kids or your survivors will be getting. And whether you accumulate fund enough or not, a risk is shared between the الcontributors. يعني هو قائم على مبدأ التكافل الاجتماعي. سواء جمعتي انت اشتراكات او ما جمعتي البنفتس مضمونة. حتى لو لا سمح الله صار واحد عجز أو صارت له وفاة بعد سنة سنتين من دخوله للفند regardless of how much they contributed البنفت مضمونة. What the defined contribution is the other way around. Your benefits are not guaranteed, but or not defined, but your contribution is. يعني أول ما تدخلين السيستم بيكون موضح لك إيش هي نسبة الاشتراكات المطلوبة. وبناء على هذه الاشتراكات لما تتجمع هذه الاشتراكات في نهاية المدة، طبعا هذه الاشتراكات بتتجمع it will be invested and then it will be تقسم على annuities. And you will be getting the annuities based on the contribution that you've put in the system. And it's شوف إذا لاحظتي إن هنا الريسك, this is what I said, إن الريسك is shifted to the individual من الجوفرمنت والحكومات والشركات الحين قاعدة تستخدم هذا النظام. ليش؟ لأن صار عندهم كثير liabilities كبرت بشكل كبير جدا، صاروا ما قادرين يتعاملون معها. defined benefit is very 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 costly بالنسبة للحكومات. فهذا علاج بالنسبة لهم في الآونة الأخيرة. كثير بس أنا أحس بأن what I can see, and please correct me if I said that I'm not very familiar with the DC, but أكثر شيء صار في الغرب لأن عندهم كثير من ال private pensions. يعني هناك الشركات تدير صناديقها التقاعدية بنفسها. فأتوقع أن بدأ من هناك. فما أعرف أنا بالنسبة لي، وهذا اللي أنا وضحته، كدول خاصة مثل دولنا دول ريعية والسوشيال كونتراكت بالنسبة لنا كبيرة ومهمة. ما أعرف إلى أي مدى ممكن نحن نطبقه. أتمنى أن يكون يعني التوضيح كافي.
Could we get the microphone to this gentleman? Just the gentleman's brilliant. We'll do one more question from this gentleman. Then I have a question from Phil and a question from Kim, and then we have to stop.
Hello, I'm Ed Carney. I ran a small oil field company in the United States for 40 years, retired, and now I consult in Saudi Arabia. I had 150 employees. We converted from a defined benefit to a defined contribution in 1987. We had guys like you, well-educated, mostly young in those days. There were 28, 30-year-old guys with MBAs and a good education came in, 75% of my employees did not have the vocabulary or the financial education to even understand what we were talking about. And they, in the United States, they outlawed me because I was not a licensed financial advisor from talking to my own employees. I'd have to stand up at a meeting and tell them that I'm not allowed to do this. I can't tell you what to do, but I'll tell you what I do and why. And yet, you saw them, when they were able to direct their own investments, we gave them like 10 options. The big companies, you talk to Conoco, and they have hundreds of options of how you can invest, self-direct your money. But it's a disaster, and the education almost has to start on a high school level. To just give you an example, this year, Soviet Union tried to raise the retirement age by 2 years. They had riots in Moscow. Nicaragua increased the contribution by 2% and decreased the benefit by 2%. They had riots in the street, and 285 people were killed. I mean, we have a big problem coming, and most of the people in this room are on the upper level, and the people that are actually talking to your carpenters, your bulldozer drivers, and your forklift drivers are 3 levels below you. And I mean, I saw this firsthand. Small companies, you can't get away from it, and I think we have a crisis coming.
Did you solve the problem, and if so, how?
No, I didn't. I had one employee, Jerry, was with me for 15 years, and he wanted to take money out. The only savings he had in the world was what we put in his pension for him. We had a profit sharing and a matching, and he had about 75 grand in there. He came to me 5 times and said, I want to take this money out. And I said, you can't. There's only 3 reasons. You're buying your first home, you're putting a kid through college, you got a medical emergency. You don't qualify. He kept calling, I don't know if I should tell you who managed it for me, but New England Financial managed it. He kept calling them, and they finally said, well, just quit. You'll get your money. He quit, took his money, went on a big vacation, came back 6 months later, wanted to know if he could have his job back. And I told him no because, and you know what? 4 other people followed him. I lost 5 employees over that. They figured out how to get money out of their pension. Jerry's probably, I know what's going on with Jerry right now. He's 60 years old, living in someone's basement in Buffalo, New York. But they don't have the education to manage their own money.
So, education. How do we educate people? Can we educate people to understand these relatively complex issues? Does anyone want to comment on that? Pan, you're looking like you might. No? God, I'm going to throw that one at you. Go on. Have a go. See if you can say something about it.
Yeah, I'll try to
financial
keep
education.
it quick. Yeah, financial literacy. Absolutely, I think that's so key. And I've talked to many countries, many systems around the world that have a defined contribution scheme. And that's a key common weakness, financial literacy levels. Even in, I'm going to pick on Singapore, which has high levels of education. They don't have high levels of financial literacy. And the problem with defined contribution is that, as I mentioned before, we've asked individuals now to become their own investment manager, financial planner, actuary, and so forth. But we haven't given them the tools to do that, and that is very dangerous. And that's why I think that, I don't think there's just a binary choice between DB or DC. There has to be a better, for real reform, we have to look at a system in between that has some merits where we're not putting the entire burden on the individual and not giving them the tools to do that. So I agree that financial literacy is paramount, and that's something that needs to be addressed if we continue to place that burden on the individual. But I think that a better solution is to move away from having all the risks on the individual.
Okay, so I'm going to try and pick one of Kim's questions. That sort of answers one of Phil. I don't know which one of you is Phil, but Phil asked about tax, and about education. We've talked about education. I think we might come to tax later in the day. Auto-enrollment and the putting people on DC plans. One of you mentioned it. I think it was you. Auto-enrollment leads to another question, which is there a country, a system that's got it right anywhere in the world, or are we all a little bit in the dark? Kim was talking about auto-enrollment in the UK, but said it's a great system, but the contributions are inadequate, so it's not actually providing adequacy, even if it is sustainable. Last question to all of you, if you want to come in, is where should we be looking for these answers? Is there any one place or places that have got this problem solved? Leandros.
No, there isn't a place, simply because the nature of different systems is also a function of what type of democracy or otherwise they run. Pensions is one part of a multi-pillar piece. In pensions, we call it, pillar 1, 2, and 3, and we've been talking about one part of that. So in that sense, where successes have been observed or where countries have been used as examples, it's often a very basic reason why they've worked, and sometimes it will simply be because the state gives very generous benefits because the type of society that it is accommodated within nurtures that outcome. So I think from a MENA perspective, from this region, I say this as someone who lives in Britain but is Greek Cypriot by heritage. I don't think this region has anything that it needs to learn from systems around the world, because all the other systems have done is simply go through trials and errors. This may well be a place where actually, learning from the mistakes of others, as was made in the initial introduction, could be very relevant. And actually things such as, which we haven't touched upon today, but things such as notional defined contribution and other arrangements which actually may balance the risks between individuals having to engage with things and the state still having a part to play, but without the extra liabilities, could well be part of effective solutions.
Thank you. Han and then Marius, and we'll close with Mrs. Hamda. So is there anywhere in the world, Han, that you think is do you agree with what Leandros says, that every country is different and that this is still a work in progress, or are there some examples that you see where people might have got this righter than others?
Yeah, so short answer, I agree with Leandros in that no country in the world has solved this issue. This is a common challenge that every country around the world is facing, but the theme of the conference, I can see, is what does it take to build a defined contribution pension industry? I would say if we're looking at the issue of if you make people put in contributions, mandatory contributions, that's the first level. Auto-enrollment is kind of the gentler way. Have people automatically enrolled and they have to opt out. And because financial literacy tends to be a challenge around the world, by utilizing auto-enrollment, behavioral finance says that inertia takes place. People tend to stay in rather than opt out. So that's better. So that's why that topic overall has been addressed.
Thank you. So Marius, in the OECD there are a range of countries with a range of different demographics and challenges. Do you see any of them again more advanced, more forward-thinking in the way they're addressing these problems?
So first of all, I agree that a country with a perfect system does not exist, of course. And then obviously we do have countries that are good in some aspects and maybe a bit less on other aspects. So there are some countries that really are very concerned about the financial sustainability of their systems, whereas others look much more into the adequacy, like France is really concerned about providing relatively high pensions. But what I think is that obviously
a little closer to
sorry. That of course it is important to look at other countries in order to compare yourself, but you cannot see a pension system of a country separately from the rest of the system. So you have to keep in mind that every country, in a sense, is individual, because things that also play for the performance of the pension system are the labor market, are the demographic structure, and so on. So it's obviously important to look around to see and learn by the errors of others, but then you have always to think, how will I adapt this to the situation in my country?
Thank you. Hamda, so the final comment on the panel, do you look internationally when you're looking at trying to solve some of your problems? Are you looking at other people in the region, people like in Egypt? Or do you look for role models, or are you trying to source your solutions internally?
Definitely, we look in the region and internationally, and especially that we are part, as I said, of the ESA, where ESA provides the platform of social security organization from all around the world, and that for us is a platform where we can learn from others. And as they said, success has clue, and it's always the advantage that I see as an organization, as I said, is that we are still young, and we have the benefit of the technology and the experience of others, and so we are definitely learning. We're definitely learning every day.
Good. Well, that's a nice note to end on. I'm sorry I've run over a little bit and kept you from your next panel. But could you do two things for me, please? First of all is to thank my very erudite, articulate panelists. And could you also, I'm not actually sure who is moderating the next panel, but whoever it is, could you welcome them? Jamal, could you welcome Jamal to the stage to moderate the next panel?